Welcome back to our studios here in Lahore. I'm Hamza Amjad, and let's begin the bulletin with Syria, where 28 fighters have been killed during a government advance into rebel-held areas of northern Hama province. The Syrian Observatory says the dead included 10 government soldiers and 18 rebels. Another 5 people were killed by an ISIS car bombing in a Kurdish-held town in northeast Syria. Earlier in the day, 4 fighters of the Kurdish-led Syrian Democratic Forces were killed in 2 attacks in eastern Deir ez-Zor province. A truce proposed in the recent Astana format talks was supposed to protect 3 million people living in the northern region, but it was observed for only 2 days after Damascus accused its opponents of attacking civilian areas. In Afghanistan, 18 people have been killed and 145 others wounded in a car bomb explosion outside a police station in Kabul. The Taliban have claimed responsibility. The Afghan Interior Ministry says the injured have been moved to the hospital. This comes as the US and Taliban negotiate a peace deal ahead of the September 28th Afghan polls. Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan is chairing the second meeting of the National Security Committee. Earlier, Khan discussed India's illegal accession of occupied Kashmir with Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman over the phone. The NSC will discuss the recommendations of Parliament and decisions taken at yesterday's Corps Commanders Conference. Speaking to Parliament yesterday, the Premier said India's decision to revoke the article is based on an extremist ideology. He said the special status of occupied Kashmir is protected under international law, and to revoke it is against UN resolutions. Prime Minister Khan has formed a 7-member committee to review the political, diplomatic and legal aspects of the Kashmir situation. And in Kashmir, an unarmed youth has been martyred by Indian occupation forces in Srinagar amid a total lockdown of the valley. The forces have also arrested over 100 others in the past 12 hours. Occupied Kashmir is under a crushing curfew since the last 72 hours after India unilaterally announced its accession. In defiance of the Indian oppression, Kashmiris took to the streets to protest New Delhi's revocation of their right to self-determination. Occupying forces baton-charged the unarmed peaceful protesters and fired tear gas. Venezuela's government says it will continue talks with the opposition despite new US economic sanctions. Opposition leader Juan Guaido also says he is ready to continue dialogue with President Nicolás Maduro's administration. Foreign Minister Jorge Arriaza said Venezuela would not surrender to the US pressure and will bypass the latest round of sanctions. However, US National Security Advisor John Bolton said Washington will impose sanctions on any company doing business with Caracas. On Monday, Washington seized all the Venezuelan government's US-based assets. While Israel has approved the construction of more than 2,300 illegal settlements in the occupied West Bank, a local NGO, Peace Now, says the building plans are the latest in a surge of such approvals since US President Donald Trump took office in 2017. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu pledged to annex much of the West Bank during his election campaign earlier this year. His government began demolishing dozens of Palestinian homes in East Jerusalem last month. The United States and Saudi Arabia say they will work together to counter Iran's aggressive efforts to disrupt oil supplies in the Persian Gulf. Meeting in Washington, Saudi Energy Minister Khalid Al-Faleh and US Energy Secretary Rick Perry promised to ensure the smooth supply of oil to global markets. In a statement, they said they would tackle Iran's attempts to disrupt supplies. This comes after Iran seized a second vessel in the Gulf earlier this week, claiming it was carrying smuggled fuel. Well, US President Donald Trump says talks are underway with South Korea on paying a greater share of the cost of maintaining American forces in the peninsula. He said Seoul has paid very little over the past few decades. Trump said South Korea paid $990 million to Washington last year at his request. The US military has maintained a large force in South Korea since the Korean War in the 1950s. And North Korea has called its latest missile launches an adequate warning over the US and South Korea's joint military drills. Pyongyang conducted its fourth short-range missile test in less than 2 weeks, warning it might pursue a new road. Supreme Leader Kim Jong-un inspected the launch of a new type of tactical guided missile to verify its war capacity. The exercises are taking place despite Pyongyang's warnings they would jeopardize nuclear negotiations between the US and North Korea. Meanwhile, US National Security Advisor John Bolton reminded Kim of his pledge to President Donald Trump. Kim had promised not to resume launching intercontinental range missiles that threaten the US. Well, Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky says he has urged Russian President Vladimir Putin to resume peace talks over the separatist region of Donbass. The leader spoke after 4 Ukrainian soldiers were killed in shelling by Russian-backed separatist forces on Tuesday. Zelensky says such incidents should be stopped in order to bring both countries closer. Putin said Ukrainian forces should stop shelling civilian settlements in Donbass. The leaders of Ukraine, Russia, France and Germany last met in 2016 for the Normandy peace talks. Members of the United Nations have signed an agreement to make it easier to settle cross-border commercial disputes. The Singapore Convention on Mediation has been signed by 46 countries, including the US and China. This comes amid rising trade tensions between the world's 2 top economies, Washington and Beijing. Elsewhere, Japan and South Korea have locked horns over trade tariffs. Singapore's Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong said the convention will help advance international trade, commerce and investment. Loong said the signatories have come together to declare that they are open for business. UN Legal Affairs Assistant Secretary General Stephen Matthias said he hopes the convention will improve the credibility of mediation. While the UK's opposition Labour Party says it will back a second referendum in Scotland to decide whether it will remain in post-Brexit Britain. Speaking in Edinburgh, Labour's deputy leader John McDonnell said the party will not block the vote. He said the Labour Party believes the people of Scotland have a democratic right to decide their future. This comes after a recent opinion poll showed 52% of Scottish voters now back secession from the UK. Colombia has announced it will grant citizenship to 24,000 children born to Venezuelan parents in its territory since August 2015. The move aims to safeguard the fundamental rights of stateless infants. Until now, Colombian law only allowed children of foreigners who legally reside in the country to apply for citizenship. The children will also have access to health and education. According to immigration authorities, more than 1.4 million Venezuelans are in Colombia after fleeing the economic crisis in the oil-rich nation. Many of these migrants entered Colombia without a passport. More than $2 million worth of gold coins were stolen when armed robbers broke into a Mexican government coin manufacturer. Security officials say the coins were stolen from a vault that had been left open. Police say 2 people broke into a Casa de Moneda branch in the morning after throwing a security guard to the ground. Security officials say the robbers filled a backpack with 1,567 gold coins. Criminal activities in Mexico have increased during record lawlessness plaguing the country. And in Turkey, thousands of people are protesting against the impact of a Canadian-owned gold mining on the local environment. Activists say the cyanide being used to extract the gold is contaminating the soil and water from a nearby dam. Protests near the western town of Kirazli have attracted a large number of activists since late July. They say the Canadian company has cut down 4 times the number of trees allowed by its mining concession. The Turkish government has rejected the protesters' claims. Over in Newfoundland, Canada, icebergs are a source of wonder to tourists and a joy to merchants. More and more ice giants from Greenland are drifting to this island in eastern Canada. Some see it as a boom, and others see it as a stark illustration of the accelerated melting of the Arctic.
Every summer in Newfoundland, Edward Keane goes hunting for icebergs. Keane and his crew collect ice blocks that have floated down thousands of miles from Greenland's glaciers, a sight that's becoming more common as temperatures rise.
They're going to die in a couple, 3 weeks, and naturally be gone back to nature anyway. So we're not here hurting the environment.
The water from the glaciers of the Arctic is renowned for its purity because it was frozen long before the air pollution of the Industrial Revolution. Over 2 months, Keen and his crew can recover about 800,000 litres of iceberg water, which they sell to traders at $1 a litre. Kerry Chalk then bottles the ice water and sells it at the markup price of $20 US. Between May and July each year, hundreds of icebergs break away from Greenland's glaciers and ice sheet and drift to the Canadian coast. For the past 4 years, former fisherman Barry Strickland has organised tourist excursions around icebergs, which often sell out.
Keep getting better every year. You know, we got tour buses coming here now. You can't see behind you there, but we just had a tour bus coming out. We got 135, 140 tour buses, you know, with older people coming into the town every season.
Greenland's ice experienced a record thaw in June 2019, and the Arctic is warming 3 times faster than the rest of the world. But for these coastal communities, the icebergs that venture down from Greenland could be floating white tonight.
Now, the Philippines has declared dengue a national epidemic after the death toll from the outbreak tops 600. The outbreak follows the banning of an ineffective French dengue vaccine, which caused dozens of children's deaths over the past 2 years. The health department says 150,000 cases of dengue were recorded between January and July. It said children below the age of 10 have been worst affected by the disease. Officials say most of the country has been affected by the epidemic so far. The death toll from the tropical storm Typhoon that hit northern Vietnam on Monday has risen to 12. Vietnam's Natural Disaster Prevention Agency says the powerful storm has left 9 others missing. The agency says the missing are mostly from Thanh Hoa province. Caused heavy rain, whirlwinds, landslides and floods in the northern region. Natural disasters in the Southeast Asian country have killed 34 people and damaged over 300 houses so far this year. The General Statistics Office says the storms caused economic losses of about $10.5 million US. The United Nations Development Programme says Vietnam faces 6 or 7 typhoons on average every year. Let's take a look at the business news now. After days of losses, European stock markets have gained ground as fears of a protracted trade war between China and the US recede. Investor sentiment was buoyed by the $3.9 billion sale of chemical park operator Currenta by Germany's Bayer and Lanxess groups. The DAX in Frankfurt and Paris's CAC index are both trading more than 1% higher. London's FTSE 100 index is up 0.75% despite losses reported by major commodities firm Glencore. Asian bourses closed mixed after the White House said it would pursue scheduled trade talks with China in September. The Nikkei 225 and Shanghai Composite and Kospi indices all closed down a fraction. The Hong Kong and Shanghai Banking Corporation has agreed to pay $336 million to settle tax frauds. HSBC's Swiss private banking arm has been charged by Belgian prosecutors with carrying out fraudulent activities in the country. The prosecutors say the bank encouraged the evasion of EU savings tax by creating offshore companies in tax havens. They say it also carried out illegal activities in the Caribbean for wealthy Belgian clients. HSBC has pledged a significant overhaul of its practices to counter financial crime risks. This comes as European governments have stepped up their pressure on banks and tax havens in recent years. Welcome back. Now, the second meeting of the National Security Committee here in Pakistan has ended. And for more on that, we have with us our correspondent from Islamabad, Sumaira Khan. So, Sumaira, thanks for taking the time out. So, what's the outcome of the meeting?
Yes, first of all, it was almost a 3 hours long meeting, and almost the entire top civil and military brass was present in that meeting, and they discussed the situation arising out of this unilateral and illegal actions by the Indian government and the situation inside Indian-occupied Jammu and Kashmir and along line of control. And after deliberating upon all the factors, it was decided by the entire committee after the Prime Minister's approval, who was chairing this meeting, that downgrading of diplomatic relations with India, suspension of bilateral trade with India, review of bilateral arrangements with India, matters to be taken to the United Nations, including the Security Council. These measures should be taken at the first place, and there would be no delay in implementing all these measures that were approved in this National Security Council meeting just a while ago. That concluded with all these recommendations. And after this, Prime Minister also approved another measure that for the first time in the history of Pakistan, on official level, on state level, 15th August, which is Independence Day of India, will be observed as Black Day nationwide in Pakistan. And it was the Prime Minister added his remarks that this should send a message to the entire international community that the whole nation is united against all the barbarism and the atrocities going on in Indian-occupied Kashmir, and the recent abrogation of Article 370A in India, in Jammu and Kashmir. After that, 14th August has been approved as the National Solidarity Day with Indians, and once again, it was Prime Minister and all the three services chiefs. They reiterated his remarks that yes, this year, on this 14th August, the entire Pakistani nation, they will reaffirm their support to the Kashmiri people in a wholehearted manner.
Right, well, thank you so much, Samara Khan. That was our correspondent there in Islamabad. And of course, the meeting has ended. It was a 3-hour-long meeting, according to her. The top military brass was there. Prime Minister Khan was chairing it. It was the second meeting there. And they said they took a full review of the bilateral relations with India. And she said that on the 14th of August, and this is for the first time in the history of Pakistan, that we will be observing a day of national solidarity with Kashmir. And the 15th of August, and this is also in the first time in the history of Pakistan, will be observed as the Black Day. And that's all we have for now. So stay tuned to Indus News for further updates. As always, thanks for watching.